Have mercy. Please, I can make you a dad if you forgive me, said the desperate Apache woman.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Northern Arizona Territory, late autumn 1882, near the Mogollon Rim. The land was dry and stripped bare of sound. The kind of silence that settled in late in the year when the air turned sharp and the wind cut low across the flats, lifting dust from the cracked earth. Sagebrush clung to the soil like it had no better place to die. Faint gray clouds stretched thin across the open sky, and night pressed close behind them. Calder Vane stood on the porch of his cabin, one hand around a tin coffee cup, the other resting near the butt of his old Henry rifle leaning against the doorframe. He watched the fence line, squinting through the fading dusk. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders, the thick canvas worn at the elbows. Beneath it, he wore a dark flannel shirt tucked into old trousers, both dulled by ash and time. He hadn't shaved in days. He didn't care to. He hadn't trusted quiet since the war. He'd been a Union scout, back when the territory bled at its edges. Rode long miles in bad weather. Saw what men could do when given reason. Lost a woman when he got back. A fever took her before he could. That was 10 years ago. Now, he ran cattle and mended fences no one saw but him. The land didn't ask questions. That's what he liked about it. He brought the cup to his lips and stopped. There, movement near the barn. Not the way a horse moved. Not a goat either. Too low. Too careful. He set the cup down, picked up the rifle, walked. Footsteps slow, steady, deliberate. As he got closer, the shape took form. Someone crouched near the feed barrel behind the corral, trying to stay in shadow, but not used to sneaking. A body half hidden under a threadbare blanket, fingers working at the sack of oats. The posture was wrong for a grown man. Too narrow, too slight. He stepped closer. The figure bolted. She didn't make it far. He lunged and caught her by the shoulder, dragging her down in the dirt. She landed hard, elbow scraping rock, shoulder hitting dry earth with a thud. She grunted. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry out. Calder stood over her with the rifle low but ready. She looked up, face half lit by the fading sky. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt. Her black hair was partly braided, though most of it had fallen loose, tangled with feathers and leather cords. Her chest rose fast and sharp. The neckline of her dress, torn deerskin, frayed and too thin for the season, hung crooked, slipping off one shoulder. Bruises mottled her upper arm and ribs. One moccasin was falling apart at the seam. Apache. She didn't try to run again. Didn't plead. Just looked up at him, jaw set tight, eyes locked on his. Her hands twitched like they couldn't decide whether to reach or brace. He didn't speak, just watched her. Seconds passed, drawn tight by breath and judgment. Her lips parted. She looked ready to say nothing. But then her voice cracked through the tension. "Have mercy," she whispered. Calder didn't blink. "Please." Her voice was hoarse now, her throat dry. "I can make you a dad. If you forgive me." The words didn't make full sense at first. Not to him. She looked away as soon as she said it. Ashamed, or maybe bracing for a blow. He didn't give her one. He just studied her. Face unreadable, but inside, something moved. Not pity. Not exactly. Recognition, maybe. A memory of desperation. A different shape of it, but the same weight. She was young. 20, maybe a little more. Hungry. Dirty. Worn down. But not broken. Not yet. He lowered the rifle slowly. She stayed where she was, watching him from the ground. He didn't offer her his hand, but he jerked his chin toward the barn. "Go on," he said, voice flat and low. She didn't move at first. Then she did cautiously. She rose slow, favoring her left leg like something hurt. She limped as she followed him, one arm wrapping across her stomach. Her breathing was still tight. She didn't speak again. Inside the barn, the goats stirred. The horses didn't. The light was low, just enough from the lantern near the tack wall to see. Calder walked to the far stall, grabbed a horse blanket, and dropped it near a pile of hay. He didn't say anything else. She looked at the blanket, then at him. He turned and left. The barn door stayed open behind him. Back on the porch, he sat again, his jaw working tight. He looked out over the land. Nothing moved now. The wind had gone quiet. He wasn't sure what he'd just done. He didn't know her name. Didn't know if she was lying. Didn't care for now. She hadn't begged. She'd offered herself like a trade. But he wasn't the kind of man to take it. Not like that. Not anymore. She was cold. Alone. Something had happened. He didn't know what. But he'd seen enough pain in his life to know when someone had nowhere left to go. She could have food. She could have a place out of the wind. That's all for now. In the barn, she lay quiet among the animals. He could hear the straw shift once, then go still. He stared out into the dark until the stars came, one by one. She hadn't stolen anything. Not yet, but something had already been taken from her. And for tonight, that was reason enough to let her stay. The sun rose slow and red over the flats, spilling weak light across the frost-laced earth. The barn roof was still rimmed with cold, the kind that clung until mid-morning. Caldervane was already up, standing at the pump behind the house, working the handle in silence. The water came slow this time of year, cold and biting. He splashed it on his face anyway, wiped his hands dry on his trouser legs, and walked toward the barn. He hadn't slept much. The girl had stayed quiet all night. No rustling, no movement after the first hour. But still, sleep didn't come easy. Not with a stranger under his roof. Not even one sleeping with goats. He pulled the barn door open and stepped inside. The animals stirred but didn't spook. The horses turned their heads, ears flicking. In the back stall, where he'd left the old blanket, she was sitting upright against the wood wall. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her hair was messier now, a few feathers fallen. The leather strap from her dress had slipped off her shoulder again. She didn't move to fix it. Her eyes were wide but tired. She looked like she hadn't slept either. He took a few steps forward. She tensed. Her arms stayed wrapped around her legs. Her body didn't shift an inch. "You hungry?" he asked. She didn't answer. He stared for a moment, then turned and walked out. Back in the house, he set a skillet over the fire and cracked 2 eggs. He sliced a bit of leftover salt pork and let it sizzle. There wasn't much, but it would hold her. He added 2 pieces of dry biscuit from yesterday's tin, softened them with grease, and scraped it all onto a tin plate. When he brought it back to the barn, she hadn't moved. He crouched a few feet away, set the plate down in the straw between them, and straightened up without speaking. Still she didn't move. He turned to go, but paused. "What's your name?" he asked over his shoulder. Her voice came low and slow. "Asha." He nodded once, said nothing more. By the time he was halfway back to the porch, she had reached for the plate. He didn't look back. That afternoon, Calder worked the fence line to the south. The north had held through the last wind, but the south slats were starting to loosen from the cold. He repaired them with new nails, checked the wire, cut back the brush that had grown too close. The work kept his hands moving, which was better than his mind wandering. He hadn't meant to keep her. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. But he hadn't kicked her out either. By sundown, he came back to the house, boots dragging a fine line of dust behind him. The barn door was shut, but the latch wasn't tight. When he pushed it open, Asha was sweeping the floor with an old broom she must have found in the corner. The stalls were neater. The oat sacks were stacked. His tools were hanging in a cleaner row on the nails. She didn't look at him, just kept sweeping. He didn't stop her. "You're not the first to pass through," he said, voice level. "Most steal and keep going." She paused. "I didn't take anything." "I know." She turned, met his eyes. "You gonna send me away now?" He didn't answer right away. He didn't know yet. "I didn't do nothing wrong," she said, voice harder than before. He studied her face. Dirt streaked across one cheek, a cut healing under her right eye. Her dress was too thin, torn, too revealing for a cold night like this. But she didn't shrink from him, didn't try to cover herself. "You said you can make a man a dad," he said finally. "What did you mean by that?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she sat down on the edge of the empty stall, slow and stiff. "My people threw me out, said I was cursed. A man took me and hit me. I bled. They say it was my fault. A life lost, one that didn't get to breathe." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "I didn't want him. I didn't say yes. But they blame me anyway." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes dropped. "I said that to you, so you wouldn't shoot. That's all. I didn't mean it to be shameful." He stood there a moment longer. Then he moved to the back wall, grabbed a folded wool blanket from an old crate and tossed it to her. She caught it, surprised. "Cold tonight," he said. "You'll sleep warmer with that." He turned and left. That night, the wind picked up again. Calder sat on his porch, hat pulled low, coffee growing cold in his hands. Inside the barn, he imagined her curled under the wool, maybe still awake, maybe still waiting for the next blow or the next cruel word. He wasn't sure what she expected from him, but he figured silence was better than most things. No one came out here to be found. No one stayed unless they had nothing else. He didn't know if she was broken, but she wasn't lying, not in her eyes. And if she was willing to work, to stay quiet, to help without asking, then maybe, just maybe, she could stay. By the third morning, Asha was already outside when Calder came down from aloft. She was crouched near the goat pen, sleeves rolled back, fingers working fast to loosen a tangle of wire that had pulled free during the wind. Her deerskin dress, still torn at the hip and neckline, was tied now at the waist with an old strip of twine, holding it together better than before. Her hair was braided back, feathers still tucked in. The bruises along her arm looked less angry now. She hadn't spoken much since the night she told him the truth. Neither had he, but something between them had started to shift. He approached slow, boots crunching over frozen dirt. "You fixin' to take my job?" he said, tone flat but not unfriendly. She glanced up, sun in her eyes. "You move too slow." It caught him off guard. Her first joke. He grunted once. That was the closest he got to a laugh. Calder knelt beside her. Together they reset the wire, drove in a fresh stake. She handed him the hammer without him asking. Her fingers were scraped but steady. She worked like someone who knew labor, like someone who'd learned to carry her own weight long before arriving here. He glanced at her hand. "You from the White Mountain Band?" She hesitated. "No, Sierra Ancha." He nodded. He'd figured as much. Her face, her accent, the style of beadwork on what was left of her dress. He'd scouted through that range once, back during the war. He hadn't thought about those trails in years. When the work was done, she brushed her hands off on the edge of her skirt and looked toward the hills. "Storm's coming," she said. "I smell it." He looked out too, clouds gathering toward the rim. She was right. They worked through the day. She hauled buckets from the spring, fed the goats, swept the lean-to without being told. He split firewood, checked the tack, and oiled the hinges on the gate. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Something was building in the quiet, an understanding. He didn't tell her to stay. She didn't ask if she could, but neither had left. At dusk, Calder went to the shed and returned with an old wooden cot, legs cracked but still sturdy. He carried it into the barn without a word and set it near the far wall where the straw had been flattened. She didn't say anything as she watched. He laid an extra blanket on it and stepped back. "No more sleeping in hay," he said. Asha blinked, unsure if it was a command or a kindness. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, wind hit the roof hard, rattling loose boards and howling across the flat. Calder sat at the small table inside his cabin, oil lamp burning low, sketchbook open before him. His hand moved slow, charcoal dragging lines across the page. A weathered face took shape, his old captain from the war. Another page, a cabin tucked under trees, long gone. A woman's profile, unfinished. He didn't know why he'd started drawing again. He hadn't touched the book in months. The knock came soft. He looked up. No one ever knocked here. He opened the door. Asha stood in the dark, hair down now, wrapped in the wool blanket. Her eyes flicked past him, toward the hearth. The wind pushed at her back. She didn't say anything, just stood there. He stepped aside. She entered. The fire was still going. She walked slow, her moccasins leaving damp prints on the wooden floor. She stood in front of the fire for a long minute before turning toward him. "You said you weren't going to touch me," she said, voice low but steady. "I'm not. Then I can sleep here tonight." He didn't answer, just nodded. She lay down near the hearth, blanket wrapped tight, body turned away from him. Calder watched the fire until the wood burned low. She didn't move again. He didn't ask why she came. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe she just didn't want to be alone when the wind sounded like cries through the rafters. By the time he climbed into bed, her breathing had deepened, even in calm. For the first time in months, his own chest felt still. There were things he didn't know yet. like why she was truly cast out or how she'd survived before now. And she didn't ask him what happened to his leg or why he never rode into town. But some things didn't need telling yet. They stayed. That was enough for now. The storm lasted 2 nights. Rain fell in sheets, turning the flats into patches of dark mud and standing water. Wind hammered the land like it meant to level it. The barn creaked and groaned but held. Calder patched leaks between shores. Asha stayed close, never idle. She moved with purpose, feeding the goats, scraping water away from the barn's base with a flatboard, sweeping mud from the cabin steps before he could. By the 3rd morning, the land had quieted. Mist hung low across the brush like smoke. The sky was pale, bruised at the edges. Calder rose early and found her already tending the fire, crouched in front of the hearth. Her dress, still the same torn deerskin, clung damp against her shoulder and hip. The same bruises lingered faintly under her skin, but they looked older now, fading. She stirred the pot with a wooden spoon. Cornmeal porridge, not fancy but warm. He hadn't told her to cook. She'd just started. He leaned against the doorframe, watching. She didn't look up. "You used to cook like that before?" he asked. She nodded once. "For my mother. For my brother." He crossed the floor slow and sat on the bench across from her. "You got family left?" "No." She didn't expand. He didn't push. They ate in silence. The warmth helped. Her fingers had stopped trembling when she held the spoon. Her eyes stayed low but calm. After breakfast, Calder handed her his old slicker. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders wide, but she took it without question and followed him out to the paddock. The horses needed walking. One had a limp he hadn't noticed before. Together, they moved the animals in a drier ground and checked hooves. He showed her how to clean a stone from under a gelding's foot. She didn't flinch, didn't fuss. She learned fast. Later, they split kindling behind cabin. She watched how he gripped the axe, then took it and swung clean through a small log without comment. He grunted approval and passed her another. They were working side by side when it happened. A bird called overhead, sudden, sharp, and Asha ducked low, hand snapping up in front of her face, body tightening all at once like she'd been struck. Calder froze. "You all right?" he asked, voice steady. She looked up, realized what she'd done, swallowed hard. It sounded like her voice trailed off. He waited. She stood up straight, wiping her hands on her thighs. Never mind, but the look in her eyes didn't match her words. She was still back in some other place. He didn't press, just nodded. By dusk, they were inside again. The air had turned colder. Calder lit the fire, fed it more wood than usual. Asha sat on the floor, back against the wall, wrapped in the wool blanket. Her hair was loose now, falling over one shoulder. The way the firelight hit her face made her look younger, tired but softer. She watched him sketch. He hadn't meant for her to see it. He hadn't drawn with anyone else in the room in years. But she didn't interrupt, just leaned closer, slow, until she could see the page clearly. It was a woman's face this time, slim, angled, unfinished. "Who is she?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. His hand stopped moving. "My wife," he said. "Used to be. What happened?" He stared at the drawing for a long moment. "She got sick while I was away. I came back too late." Asha looked at the fire. "They buried me too," she said, "when they cast me out." He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't offering pity. She wasn't asking for his. She was just telling him. "Didn't even let me say anything," she added. "No one asked what happened. They just said I was cursed, that I was meant to bring death." He nodded slowly. "You're not cursed," he said, voice low. "I know that now." She reached over, touched the side of his hand. Not a grip, not a demand, just her fingers against his, warm and still. He didn't pull away. Later, as night fell fully, she climbed into the cot. He lay on the bed. The fire popped, casting brief shadows against the walls. And for the first time since she arrived, he heard her voice in the dark, soft and clear. "Thank you for not being like the others." He didn't answer, but the silence between them meant something different now. And she knew it. The mornings came colder now. Frost layered the fence rails, and the water at the edge of the trough iced over before noon. Calder rose before first light, fed the stove with pine knots, and boiled coffee in silence. The days had settled into a rhythm he hadn't expected, and for the first time in years, there was movement in his house that wasn't just his own. Asha moved quietly, but with purpose. She'd begun wearing an old flannel shirt of his over her deerskin dress, sleeves rolled and pinned at the elbows. It hung off her frame, but it gave her warmth. Her dress underneath was still torn across the neckline and side seam. She hadn't asked for a new one, hadn't complained. The rips didn't seem to shame her anymore. She didn't try to hide what was already known. That morning, they worked shoulder to shoulder stacking drywood inside the lean-to. She handed him logs, and he placed them neat and tight, building rows. At one point, their hands brushed, knuckles meeting in the transfer of cedar split. Neither moved for a second. She didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. It was the longest touch they'd shared, and it passed like nothing was said, but stayed in the air. Later, Calder set to cleaning one of the rifles. He sat on the porch bench, barrel in his lap, cloth in hand. Asha came out and watched him for a while without interrupting. "You ever fire one?" he asked, not looking up. She nodded. "My brother taught me when we were younger." He set the cloth aside and reached for the other rifle, a shorter Winchester he hadn't used in some time. He checked the chamber, wiped the metal, and held it out. "Show me." She stepped forward, took it, checked the action, tested the weight. Her stance was solid. Her grip was practiced. She aimed once toward the hills, careful not to pull the trigger. "You weren't lying," he said. "I don't lie," she replied. He nodded. "Tomorrow I'll take you further out. Show you the rim trail. You need to know the land if you're going to stay." She looked up at him, quiet for a moment. "I want to stay," she said plainly. "If that's allowed." "It is." That night, they sat close by the hearth. The fire burned steady. Asha had washed her hair in the rain barrel earlier that day, and now it hung loose down her back, drying in the warmth. She wore only the flannel shirt now, her deerskin dress hanging over the back of a chair to dry. The shirt covered her to her thighs, but nothing more. She didn't seem uncomfortable. Neither did he. He poured her a cup of coffee. She took it with both hands, fingers brushing his again, this time on purpose. Her touch lingered. His heart, long and used to sudden feeling, tightened behind his ribs. She set the cup down after a sip. Turned to him. "You ever think about having a child?" He hesitated. "Years ago, maybe. You said you lost your wife." He nodded. "She wanted children?" "She did. We never got the chance." Asha was quiet for a long moment. Then, voice low, she said, "I want to give that to someone. To you. If you'll take it." Calder turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. There was no plea in her face, no fear. Just a steady openness he hadn't seen in her before. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, laid a rough palm against her cheek. She leaned into it, eyes closing. Her breath caught, not from fear, but something else. When she opened her eyes again, he kissed her. It wasn't hard, wasn't rushed, just firm, certain. She returned it slowly, hands resting on his chest, the firelight glowing behind her. When they parted, she didn't move away. Instead, she said, barely a whisper, "Don't send me back out there. I don't care what people said about me. This feels real." He looked at her for a long time. "You're not going anywhere," he said, and he meant it. That night, she didn't return to the cot. She lay beside him in his bed, facing him in the dark. He didn't touch her beyond her hand, held tight in his. She didn't ask for more. Neither needed words. For the first time in a long time, Caldervane let himself fall asleep with someone breathing beside him. And Asha, exiled, bruised, discarded, slept without fear. They'd found each other by accident, but neither of them wanted to let go. The wind had calmed by morning, and the first thin crust of snow traced the ridges and shaded gullies beyond the ranch. It wasn't heavy, just enough to paint the land in patches of white, reminding them both that winter wasn't waiting anymore. Inside the cabin, it was warm. The fire had burned all night. Calder opened his eyes to the slow creak of wood expanding with heat. Asha lay beside him, curled on her side, hair across her shoulder, the sleeve of his flannel shirt hanging loose at the wrist. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. For a moment, he didn't move. He hadn't woken next to someone in over a decade. She stirred, then opened her eyes slowly. She didn't flinch, just blinked once, as if checking the moment was real. "Morning," she said quietly. He nodded. "You sleep?" "Yes." He watched her another beat before sitting up and swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. The weight of her presence still lingered beside him, warm on the blankets. He stoked the fire, set the kettle on, and started frying eggs and a few strips of salt pork. She pulled the shirt tighter around herself and came to help, barefoot on the wooden floor. Their routine was different now. She didn't return to the cot. Her things stayed in the corner of the cabin. She used his comb. She laid her dress near the fire to warm before stepping into it again. And when they spoke, it was less about chores, more about things that had nothing to do with surviving. They ate breakfast facing the window, watching snow fall in lazy threads over the yard. "How far is the nearest town?" she asked. "Cottonwood's about 4 days. Bitter Hollow's closer. 2, if the weather's good." "You go often?" "No." "Why not?" He chewed a bite of biscuit. "Nothing I need from them." She seemed to accept that, but he knew what she was really asking. "Are you worried someone will come looking for me?" she asked. Calder looked over at her. Her eyes were steady, but her voice had thinned. "No one's come this far for anything in years," he said. "They didn't care when you were out there. They sure as hell won't care now." That seemed to settle something in her. She didn't ask again. Later that day, he took her out past the ridge trail as promised. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked. He carried both rifles, handed her one once they were out of sight from the cabin. "You see those rock outcrops?" he said, pointing across the flats. "You follow those east, you'll hit the old creek line. That's where I used to run trap lines." She scanned the land, committing it to memory. He showed her a stand of trees where they could cut wood if they ran low. A spring that stayed open most winters. A cave, half sheltered by stone, where he kept emergency stores. "You're showing me how to live here alone," she said, a trace of sadness in her voice. "No, I'm showing you how to stay if something happens to me." Her breath caught at that. She didn't respond. On the way back, they walked closer, not touching, but close enough their shoulders brushed now and then. When they returned to the cabin, her hand caught his at the door. "You don't owe me anything," she said. He turned to her. "I know, but I want to be yours. If you'll take me." She didn't look away when she said it. He stepped forward, took her face gently in both hands. His thumbs rested against her cheekbones, and he bent his head, kissing her slow, deeper than before. Not just warmth or comfort, but something solid. She pressed against him, arms wrapping around his waist, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in either of them. Inside, the fire was still glowing when they shut the door behind them. He helped her out of the shirt. She didn't hide the bruises that were still healing, nor the curve of her body now bared. Her breath was shallow, but not from fear. When he undressed, it wasn't hurried, it was careful. His body was marked, scarred from old wounds, a jagged line over his hip, another across his shoulder. She touched them like reading a map, and he let her. They lay down on the bed together, skin to skin under the heavy quilt. She guided his hand to her belly. Her voice broke softly against his throat. "I want to make something new with you. Not because I'm afraid, because I choose it." He nodded, voice low. "You already have." They didn't speak much after that, just moved slow together, quiet and sure. It wasn't about urgency or need, it was belonging. Something neither of them had felt in too long. When the fire dimmed to coals, they slept. Her leg draped over his, her head tucked near his chest. Outside, the snow kept falling. The world stayed quiet. But inside that cabin, something steady had finally taken root. The days passed quiet after the snow, the land settling into winter stillness. Asha and Calder worked without speaking much, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't stiff or uncertain anymore. It was comfortable, shared. She rose early beside him, dressed slow while the fire warmed the room, and helped prepare breakfast like it was always meant to be this way. Her moccasins were patched now, her hand stronger. He had given her one of his spare belts to tie around her dress. The frayed tear at her side still gaped when she bent, but she didn't bother hiding it. He never looked away. They were becoming something neither of them dared name aloud, but it was there. In the way she brought him coffee before he asked. In the way he checked the door twice every night before blowing out the lamp. and how their hands found each other without needing to explain why. It was on one of those mornings, when the frost hadn't yet melted off the brush, that Calder spotted movement far off along the ridge trail. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to stir his gut. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and narrowed his eyes. One rider. No hurry, no dust, but the pace was steady. Asha came up beside him, tightening the shirt she wore over her dress. "You expecting anyone?" she asked quietly. "No." She looked at the rider, then at Calder's grip tightening around the rifle. "You want me to go inside?" He shook his head. "You stay right here." They waited in silence as the horse picked its way across the rise. It was a bay, worn and narrow-hipped. The man riding it looked older, coat dragging behind the saddle, hat pulled low. He stopped just shy of the gate, raised one hand, then climbed down slow. No visible weapon, but Calder didn't relax. The man spoke first. "Didn't mean to startle you. Name's Ryland. I trapped north of here. Been passing this way since before the war." Calder didn't lower the rifle, but he gave a nod. "You're a long way out for a casual visit." Ryland smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't casual. Heard tell a woman was seen wandering near Red Bluff. Apache. Pretty thing. Alone. Thought maybe she made it this way." Asha didn't flinch. She stood behind Calder, silent. "I don't know anything about Red Bluff," Calder said. Ryland's gaze shifted, catching a glimpse of Asha at Calder's shoulder. "She yours?" Calder's voice came low. "She's not anyone's but her own." The man raised an eyebrow. "Funny thing, folks up near Anchor Ridge put out word. Say she brought a curse down on her people. Thought maybe someone want her back." "She's not going back," Calder said plainly. The silence between them stretched long. Ryland nodded once, slow. "Didn't come for trouble. Then keep riding." Ryland hesitated. His eyes lingered too long. But then he mounted back up, pulled the reins, and turned the horse. Didn't look back. They watched him disappear behind the rocks. Calder didn't move until the dust settled. Asha let out a long breath. "They're still watching." He turned to her. "Doesn't matter. It does to them. To me, it doesn't." She looked at him then, not afraid but resolved. "You should know something," she said. "That story they tell, the miscarriage, the curse. It wasn't a man from our tribe that forced himself on me. It was a white trader. Came to trade sugar and flour. Took more than he gave." Calder's jaw set. "They told me to keep quiet," she continued. "Said it'd stir more trouble if I said the truth. But I didn't stay quiet. I screamed. I scratched his face. When the baby didn't live, they blamed me. Said my body was unfit. That I'd shamed the tribe." Calder didn't speak for a long time. Then he set the rifle aside, stepped toward her, and placed his hand on the side of her face. "You're not cursed," he said. "You're the strongest damn person I've met." She nodded once, slowly. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. That night, she sat beside him on the bed, knees pulled under her, his coat draped around her shoulders. He opened his sketchbook again, but this time he didn't draw the past. He began a new page. Asha, her profile by firelight. Hair loose, lips parted slightly as she watched the flames. She caught him in the act, smiled just faintly. "You gonna hang that on the wall?" she asked. "If you let me." She leaned in, her head resting against his shoulder. "You're not afraid they'll come back?" she whispered. "I've had worse things come for me. You think we'll make it?" He looked down at her, at the woman who had once tried to steal oats in the night just to survive. "We already are," he said. They lay down together again, her body warm against his, hands linked beneath the blanket. No more questions, no more doubt, just the sound of snow falling outside and a fire slowly burning low. And for the first time since either could remember, neither one of them dreamed of running. The snow stayed thick through the next week, covering the yard and fence line in quiet white. A stillness hung over the land, broken only by the sound of boots over packed trails or the distant snort of horses in the corral. Calder and Asha worked slower now, more deliberate. The cold didn't allow for rushing, and neither of them felt the need anymore. Inside, the cabin had grown into a shared space. Her blanket was folded over the back of his chair. His comb rested beside her necklace on the shelf above the wash basin. 2 cups were always set out instead of one. And in the evenings, after chores, they sat close by the hearth. Asha, sometimes brushing out her hair in long, patient strokes, Calder sketching or running his fingers over old saddle leather. There was peace in the routine, the kind that neither of them had known before. One afternoon, while clearing snow from the roof with a long-handled rake, Calder found her waiting near the porch with something bundled in both hands. When he climbed down the ladder, she unwrapped the cloth and held it out. Bread, crude, flat but cooked through, still warm. "I tried," she said simply. He took it, broke off a piece, and ate. It was rough, uneven, but good. He looked at her. "Where'd you learn?" "My mother taught me before she died," she said. "I wasn't sure I remembered how." "You did." That night, he brought out a bottle of old apple brandy, something he'd kept stashed away since the year he buried his wife. He hadn't opened it since. He poured 2 cups, handed her one without a word. She didn't ask questions. They drank by the fire. It burned warm, settled into their chests. After the second cup, she laughed, soft, the sound unexpected. He turned, caught the way her face lit just slightly. "What?" he asked. "I never thought I'd laugh again." "Me either." She moved closer. Her fingers found his, lacing through them. The heat from the brandy, the fire, and her touch all mixed into something he didn't try to fight. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead. If I give you a child, will you give me your name?" He watched her a long moment. Her voice hadn't wavered. There was no fear in it, no trembling. "You already have it," he said. "Say it." He set his cup down, turned to face her. "You're Asha Vane," he said steady. "You live here, with me. That's not going to change." She reached up, touched the side of his neck. "Then I want to start trying." He leaned in, kissing her slow. Their closeness deepened with certainty this time. No fear, no tension. The quilt fell as they lay down before the fire, their bodies bare and trusting. Her touch was bold now, and his hands roamed without hesitation. She guided his mouth to her neck, his palm to her hip. When he moved over her, she welcomed him without a word. Afterward, she lay tangled in the quilt, her head resting on his chest, her hand drawing slow lines over the scar along his rib. "You never asked me to explain everything," she whispered. "I didn't need to. I'm glad you didn't." He stared at the ceiling beams overhead, feeling the weight of her against him. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked softly. "No." Even before me? He thought about it. About the years spent living in half-light. The silence. The guilt. "I thought I deserved to be alone," he said. "Then you showed up and started feeding the goats like you owned the place." She smiled, eyes closed. "I did it because I was scared." "You didn't look scared." "I was." He kissed her again, slow, quiet. The next morning, she didn't wake early. He let her sleep, her body curled under the quilt, bare shoulder exposed to the light. He stepped outside and fed the animals, then walked to the edge of the ridge trail, rifle over his shoulder. No riders, no signs. When he returned, Asha stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in his shirt again, steaming tin cup in her hands. "Thought I'd lost you," she said, half serious. "I ain't going anywhere." She nodded, eyes warm. Later that day, while sweeping the cabin floor, she paused and pressed a hand low to her stomach. Not with pain, just a quiet gesture. She looked down, thoughtful. He noticed. She didn't say anything. Neither did he, but it was beginning. The last of the snow melted slow, trickling into dry creases along the slope. By early spring, the sagebrush stirred with new green, and the horses shed their coats in dusty clumps against the fence rails. Calder leaned against the post, arms crossed, watching Asha as she knelt in the dirt near the porch, planting beans in the soft ground. Her movements were calm, focused. She'd woven her hair back with leather cord, and she wore his shirt again, unbuttoned halfway, her dress loosened around her waist. One hand lingered often over the slight rise of her stomach. She hadn't said it yet, not aloud, but he knew. That morning, before sunrise, he'd felt her shift closer in bed, her breath shallow. Her hands rested low. When he laid his palm over her belly, she didn't move it away. Now, watching her work, he saw it clear. Her body moved different, protective, slower. Her face was softer. There was more food missing from the pantry. And when he brought her coffee, she took it with a grateful smile. then leaned her head briefly against his side before drinking. Asha was carrying life. His. He walked down the porch steps, boots crunching softly in the dirt, and crouched beside her. "You shouldn't be out here bending like that," he said. "I'm pregnant, not broken." He smirked faintly. "You're still too stubborn." She brushed hair from her face, then leaned against his shoulder. "You're the one who let a woman sleep in your barn after she tried to steal your food. You're the one who offered a child to get out of trouble." They both chuckled, quiet, knowing. He reached into his coat and pulled something from his pocket, a silver ring, simple and worn. He held it out, no speech, no ceremony, just a gesture. Asha stared at it, blinking. "You want this?" he asked. "Yes," she said, steady. "I do." He slid it on her finger, and she kissed him right there, dirt still on her hands, face warm with sunlight. The next days passed with small changes. He built a rocking chair for the porch. She made curtains from old flannel. She started stitching baby clothes by hand, sitting near the fire in the evenings. Calder cleared a patch of land behind the barn, said it was for corn, but they both knew he was making room for the life ahead. No riders came. No one from her past. No one from his. They were left alone, just as they hoped. One late afternoon, Asha walked from the spring with a basket of wild greens. As she stepped onto the porch, she paused, hand resting on her back. Calder noticed, stood quickly. "You all right?" She nodded. He kicked. He froze. "Want to feel?" She took his hand, placed it low. It took a moment, but then he felt it. Just a nudge, faint but certain. His throat tightened. He looked up at her. "Guess he's real then," he muttered. "So are we." Inside, they sat near the hearth, firelight flickering. Asha leaned into him, her hand resting over his. "You ever think this would happen?" she asked. "No. Regret it." He looked down at her, the woman who had once stood trembling in his barn, bruised and near starved, offering what she thought was her only worth. Now she sat beside him, carrying his child, wearing his ring, her eyes calm, her body strong. "I'd regret everything if it hadn't led to you," he said. She kissed him, slow, sure. That night, as the wind moved through the trees, Calder lay beside her with one hand over her belly, her head resting against his chest. Outside, the stars stretched wide over the land. No sound of danger, no fear. They had come from silence, from pain, from rejection and war and exile. Now they had peace. Now they had family. They stayed together. And that finally was enough. The end.
And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with Where Grit Meets Heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on what's next. See you soon.